Thank you. Well, I am so glad to be here, and thank you to President Giebert for inviting me to be here today. It's a real honor, and I just want to be sure that you all know a little bit more about me other than the military background. But I just want to start by saying to be here with some of the best farmers and small business owners in Illinois, you are the people who help power our state and our country. I'm not sure where I'd be without you to help fuel our cars, put food on our tables, and drive our economy. So I prioritize a strong agriculture sector in Congress, and I hope to do the same in the United States Senate. Now, some folks may be wondering why a representative from the Chicago suburbs is interested in agriculture. I'm probably more well known for my IKEA than I am for agriculture. I have a little bit of farmland, but even before becoming a statewide candidate, folks, as I said, know about my military background. But most people don't know that the very first job I had when I moved to Illinois in 1991 was actually with the American Farmland Trust. I lived in DeKalb for 13 years, and my first job was working on a practice where the American Farmland Trust put a whole bunch of us young college students in t-shirts and shorts and had us go out and try to convince farmers to convert a parcel of land to no-till farming practices. Back then, we were majority of farms are disking everything under, and so we started a research project at Northern Illinois University, Professor Dick Essex did, that I worked for, to look at ways to reduce nitrogen input, ways to save the topsoil. So much of it was blowing away. We used to get blackouts up around DeKalb when we were out there come fall, and the winds would come, and then the winter time. We were losing it through runoffs into the streams and the river. And so we were out there trying to convince folks, just give me one parcel. Just give me one little parcel and do no-till in that. We'll show you that you can reduce your nitrogen. Your yields might be a little bit lower, but overall you're going to come out ahead on it. And so it's good to be back out across the state again. When my husband Brian was based in Kewanee with the National Guard, I saw firsthand the hard work of our state's hog farmers and the fact that they are remarkable tradesmen and small business owners. It was pretty funny because my husband went to Death Valley, California for a national training center exercise, and he brought his Illinois National Guard unit out there, and the active duty guys out of California were saying, well, we're gonna do this exercise, we'll be professionals, we're not a bunch of hog farmers, you got me? And my husband's in my unit went, whoop. We are hog farmers, and we're really good at what we do. And that embarrassed the heck out of those guys, and we still won the battle, so they could do more than one thing at a time. So whether I'm in Congress or in the United States Senate, you can count on me to do two things. First, know that I will always push for economic policies that serve all of us. Second, know that I am going to work on getting Illinois farmers the resources you need to grow your businesses and to support our local economy. You know that I've been an advocate for veterans. Make no mistake, I will always be an advocate for veterans, but I will also be an advocate for farmers. Illinois farmers are a key to the strength of this nation. And yes, I love tanks and guns and helicopters, and I've flown them, driven them, and ridden in them and fired them. But a key pillar of strength of this nation is our agriculture. It is just as important as military strength, because a nation that cannot feed itself is a nation that cannot lead the world. And that is incredibly important. So for me, agriculture is just as important a priority and will be as important a priority in the Senate as it has been for me in Congress. That's why I've been such a vocal supporter of the renewable fuel standards, because a nation that cannot fuel itself is also not a nation that can lead. It's why I've been consistently pushing the EPA to revise misguided rules that reduce ethanol fuel requirements. For me, supporting the RFS is a no-brainer. It fuels not only cars, but our rural economies in Illinois and all across this great nation. As you know, this spring, the EPA released its 2017 proposal for RFS, which set corn ethanol at a mandate of 200 million gallons below the 15 billion that Congress had set as the goal. As I did last year, I've joined my colleagues on the Biofuels Caucus to urge the EPA to get renewable fuel targets for 2017 back on track as to where Congress told them it should be. I pushed hard alongside many of you to get the EPA to revise its original proposal back in 2014, 2016, and I personally wrote an open letter to the EPA join on to letters with my colleagues and join more than 300 corn farmers and ethanol industry leaders in a rally in front of the United States Capitol, and even brought scientists from Argonne and the University of Illinois to meet with the White House to show that there are positive environmental impacts from biofuels. One of the most interesting things I found was actually the scientists were able to show that if you took a field that was fallow and actually converted it to agriculture, to farming corn for biofuels, you actually reduced the amount of carbon that is actually in the atmosphere. So it actually is pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. It is better to be farming for biofuels than it is to leave a field fallow. And that, I think, opened people's eyes at the White House when we brought those folks in. As a result of our work and our advocacy, the administration revised their original proposal and increased the requirements for renewables. But many of you, and me included, were disappointed that there were not any reductions in the levels that Congress intended. Not to mention how damaging EPA's 2-year delay in finalizing a policy was to confidence in the biofuels industry. Look, we have more work to do to counter the oil industry's aggressive and misinformation campaign against the RFS, and you can count on me to be your ally. I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee, where I've been a leading voice to protect biofuel development in the Department of Defense. And for me, this goes to my nation's strength. This goes to the strength of the Department of Defense. In Iraq, 50% of the casualties that happened were as a result of convoy operations. Not of direct going out to find the bad guys to kill them, was of convoy operations. They were in combat, but it was convoy operations. 80% of all convoys were conducted to transport diesel fuel. And if we could have had the capability to develop biofuel stills within our own units, especially on a place like Balad, the air base that I worked out of, and we had that technology, we could have kept some of those trucks off of the roads, and we could have kept our soldiers focused on their mission of finding and hunting down the bad guys and killing them. Biofuels make this country stronger. Biofuels make us more of a world leader, and it actually allows our military men and women to be deadlier when they go into combat. So every year, I am there on the Armed Services Committee to defend American jobs, our access to clean, secure American energy for our military. Look, we know here in Illinois that biofuels creates hardworking jobs for Illinois families, jobs that can't be outsourced, jobs that can't be shipped overseas. The ethanol industry alone supports more than 70,000 jobs here in Illinois. It contributes $4.7 billion in direct wages every single year. Not to mention that it helps me fill up my F-150. I've been burning ethanol in it since 2006. I know where every E85 station is on I-55. And so I'm able to go up to my colleagues in Congress who say, oh, it's really bad for the engine, and this stupid stuff that have to do with leaf blowers and their argument with, and I'm like, look, my fuel injectors are clean as a whistle. And when the dealer actually recalled my truck for the exhaust manifold, he actually called me up and said, do you have a new engine in this truck? Because it's clean as a whistle. I was like, no, I've been running biofuel in it since 2006. It's got 120,000 miles on it, and 90,000 of that is pure E85. I know firsthand that it's actually good for my truck, and it's good for the environment, and it's good for America's strength. I learned a lot serving in Iraq, and I talked about what it meant for the safety of our trucks, of our truck drivers and our convoy operators, but I saw firsthand the painful price our country pays because of our dependence on foreign oil. My troops risk life and limb for this precious resource. So when we support American-made energy rather than Middle Eastern oil, we're benefiting on national security. And I'll talk to, I'm a Democrat, and I have the left wing of my own party, and I have environmentalists who say, Tammy, you say you're for the environment. How can you be for ethanol? It costs almost as much in terms of energy usage to produce ethanol. I said, yeah, but it's grown in Illinois, it's grown in America, it's American-made, and it's right here, and it's better for the environment. So I would rather burn American-grown fuel than Middle Eastern pumped fuel. Production of biofuel right here in Illinois means less foreign oil imports from countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia. It keeps us independent and more secure. And the RFS is succeeding in giving us an opportunity to end our dependence on foreign oil. In fact, we imported over 60% of our fuel in 2005, the year the RFS was first passed into law. Now we import just over 24%. That's good news for our economy, but also for our national security. Last year, we produced over 14.7 billion gallons of American-grown renewable fuel. Each of those gallons displaced foreign oil. 527 million gallons of foreign oil was displaced by American biofuels, to be exact. So as the administration finalizes this year's RFS guidelines, you can count on me to continue making the case to them about the major benefits of this policy on the environment, on rural economies, and on our national security. You can also count on me to separate misinformation and fear from facts when it comes to GMOs. I've listened to farmers, I've listened to scientists, I've listened to consumers all over Illinois and all over this nation, and as Congress has been debating GMO labeling laws. And I understand that exposing American farmers to an illogical and incoherent patchwork of regulations that changes from state to state in terms of GMO labeling regulations would be disastrous for the industry. I don't want consumers, even if you wanted to look at it from the perspective of a consumer, I would want a consumer to know that there was a national standard so that if they're going to some other state, they know exactly what those labeling standards are. And consumers are actually better served by national standards for GMO labeling. So it's why I supported the law that would set up a nationwide standard for labeling products. And I have to say, I want to just thank the Farm Bureau and the corn growers for advising me on that and being so available as I was trying to figure out all the truths from the misinformation, from the fear, from the reality, and we were able to come to an understanding. And so I think it's really an issue of partnership. Beyond our domestic regulations, I want to make a moment to talk about trade. I will support free trade agreements when they are in the best interest of Illinois, and I appreciate that growers need access to global markets. Unlike my opponent, I hope to extend trade options with Cuba and other foreign partners that will open up new opportunities to drive sales and capitalize on untapped markets. It's also why I supported and voted for repealing the country of origin labeling to avoid negative sanctions against Illinois agriculture for products being bought and sold in Mexico and in Canada. It's why I'm a co-sponsor of the Cuba Agriculture Export Act, which will repeal restrictions on export financing and marketing for agriculture products to boost sales to Cuba. This will allow our farmers to compete on a level playing field and gain access to a market that is valued at over $1 billion per year. I'm also always going to be an advocate for fair trade policies that are in the best interest of Illinois farmers. We need to balance that, though, with ensuring that we're looking out for Illinois manufacturers. My congressional district has the largest concentration of tool and die manufacturers in the nation. I believe right now that the TPP as it stands is not a good deal for Illinois as a whole. I understand that many portions of it are very good for Illinois agriculture. I will work to ensure that those portions are addressed, but for Illinois manufacturers, there are real problems with the TPP when it comes to the manufacturing sector, specifically when it has to do with currency manipulation by the Chinese. The Chinese currency manipulation, and they're dumping steel, and it's driven Illinois steel mills out of work. The last time we had currency manipulation that occurred, it actually drove 25% of the tool and die manufacturing industry out of business. I told the White House, you need to change the language in that says the TPP, you should not engage in currency manipulation to you shall not, and they did not change it. And so while I don't agree with TPP as it stands, I am open to negotiations with it. I support fair trade, and I would do everything I can to support agriculture. As you can see from what I've said about what I'm willing to do with Cuba, I'm willing to work with your representative organizations to make sure that I represent agriculture's best interests. I have full faith that we can devise stronger, more economically sound trade agreements that are good for both manufacturing and for agriculture. At the end of the day, I'm all about the strength of my nation, and the strength of our economy is part of that. This means we have to have stronger trade agreements. It means we have to invest in infrastructure here at home. And infrastructure is another thing that I plan on working on in the Senate. When I served in the National Guard, when I actually served out of Peoria, I was the Battalion S4, which was the logistics officer, and I was responsible for the largest movement of military equipment by barge down the Mississippi since the Civil War. We were going down to Fort Polk, Louisiana for training exercises, and we realized that the best way to get our equipment for our aviation battalion to Beaumont, Texas, was actually by a barge move down the Mississippi. And we have this picture. But that experience showed me firsthand all the problems that we have right now with our locks and dams. Currently, most of the locks and dams on the Mississippi are outdated, and they're not able to meet the demand here in Illinois today. We can't afford to have locks and dams on the brink of collapse. I know that investing in this kind of infrastructure is most efficient and cost-effective. It is the best way to move agriculture products. I look forward to working with you to protect the Mississippi River and improve the waterway systems across the state. This is also why we need to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers Navigation and Ecosystem Sustainability Program, man, that is a mouthful, NESP, N-E-S-P, has the resources it needs to serve our state. They have a plan, and we have a potential here to create 7 new 1,200-foot locks in the upper Mississippi River system, but they've never been actually budgeted the money to do it. All they need, I think what they're looking for is, I believe it's $12 million, and they don't even have that. In the meantime, we are blowing money in the Department of Defense budgets on things like, I actually just recovered I passed a piece of legislation. For those of you who've served in the military, there's a military vehicle called the Stryker vehicle. We used it in Iraq. We didn't use it in Afghanistan very much because the terrain is not suitable. It's good for desert terrain. When we stopped using it as much, we never canceled the spare parts contract. And 2 years ago, sitting on Armed Services Committee and on Oversight and Government Reform, we found out that in Georgia, there's a warehouse with $973 million of spare parts for the Stryker vehicle. And they were requisitioning money to build another warehouse because the spare parts kept coming and somebody just kept writing the check. So I went to the Republican chairman of the committee, Buck McKeon, who'd been a longtime chairman, who is an incredibly brilliant and fair man. And I went to him as a freshman Democrat and said, Mr. Chairman, I've got this idea. Let's cut off funding for the Stryker vehicle for 6 months and say, Army, you don't get any more money for this vehicle unless you come back with a way to recover that almost of $1 billion in spare parts. And he actually protected it. He said, you know what, I'm going to put it under the chairman's markup so that it won't be a standalone. Nobody's going to vote for a freshman Dem piece of legislation, but I'm going to put it under my chairman's markup. We'll protect it. It's a good idea. Within 3 months, the Army came back with a plan to recover all $973 million. And we can't get $12 million for locks and dams, and we're blowing money on spare parts that are not being used. We can do better. We can do better. It's clear that when we invest in our farmers, we invest in our state, we invest in our nation. I was proud to support the Farm Bill. It provides essential support for our farmers, and it saves taxpayers $23 billion. It provides critical support for risk management by solidifying the role of crop insurance. Our farmers are also our business owners, and our entire economy suffers when a bad season hits. With dropping commodity prices, I lived through 2012. Here, I watched as I drove back and forth to my National Guard monthly duty in Springfield. I watched. But then we had good years. I think 2014, 2015, we did pretty well. I think corn was what? We were at, if I remember this correctly, in 2015, we were at 100, I'm going to look it up, 175 bushels per acre. No, 178. And 2014, we were at 200. And soybean was at, what, 56, both 2014, 2015. So we did better, but 2012 can happen at any time. And that's why it's important to maintain crop insurance and make it reasonable, sustainable, and something that can actually protect farms like this one that has been in the same family for 6 generations. I want it to be there for many more generations to come. The truth is, our homegrown crops and fuel sources feed our state, feed our country, feed our world. Our farmers know our soil and crops better than anyone else. And if our farmers aren't strong, our nation isn't strong. So I'm proud to represent a state with such a robust ag industry. I'm honored to have the opportunity to be here with you today, and I really look forward to answering your questions. I don't know that I will know all the answers, but I hope that I go away from here today with you knowing a little something more about me. And if you know nothing else, know this: what drives me is the strength of my nation. My family has worn the uniform of this great nation since the Revolution. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. There's been a family member serving in uniform during every period of conflict going back to the Revolution. I would never do anything that would undermine the strength of my nation. And agriculture is a pillar of the role of my nation, of the strength of where we stand in the world. As I said before, a nation that can't feed itself, a nation that can't fuel itself, is not a nation that can lead the world. And I want us to lead the world. Thank you for letting me be here. God bless. You want me to sit for questions?
Yes, we will. Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman, for those comments and support for agriculture. We really appreciate that very much. If you have any questions and want to write any questions down on any cards, please do, and get our attention, and we will pick those cards up from you. But I have 2 questions to start with. Some were pretty quick in getting a question out. The first question is, would you, if you're elected, what would you ask for to be or to have a seat on the Senate Ag Committee?
That's a pretty prestigious committee. I think I would ask for it. I don't know if I would get it. I think based on my background, what I would end up getting is Armed Services Committee to begin with. But if they give it to me, I mean, that would be fantastic. But, I'll be a freshman and lots of people more senior.
Right. Absolutely.
I think it's like armed combat at that point.
Right. Some of those committee appointments are difficult to get at times, I'm sure.
But let me say this. I am right now on the House side, the only member on the House Armed Services Committee from Illinois. And I've worked across party lines, especially when it comes to the Corps of Engineers. And whether or not I get on the Ag Committee, we have some great folks on the Ag Committee, and the idea is to be able to cover all aspects of what is important in agriculture. So yes, if I can get on Ag, I would love it. If I don't think that I'm not going to be working for you on just because I don't get on Ag.
Thank you very much. Second question. The U.S. EPA uses science to develop rules for products that protect crops from weeds and insects. They employ a number of scientists. Do you feel science should be the basis to approve ag products to control our pests, or should politics also play a role?
Well, that's a leading question. Look, I started off as a marine biology major, although I really was not very good at biochem, so I switched to political science. Of course, science should lead the way as we decide what we need to do. But I also think that we need to listen to the folks who know the issue best. And when it comes to things like water, we need to look at the people who work the land. I don't think any scientist knows better than a farmer what is going on in his land. And I think that, yes, we absolutely need to base things on science, but also we need to listen to the average farmer, because you'd be surprised what he knows.
Absolutely. Another question. Immigration has been a hot button issue in the presidential campaign. Immigration is really important to us, and immigrant labor, whether you're in livestock or crop production, especially specialty crops. What kind of immigration policy, or where do you think immigration policy should be, and what areas would you support and maybe not support on immigration?
Sure. So I've been on the record for supporting comprehensive immigration reform, and I still support it. I think anything that we do on immigration has to have 3 guiding principles. It has to be practical, that is, something that you can do. It has to be fair, and it has to be humane. So to take children who are born in the United States who are 2 years old and deport their parents because their parents are here undocumented is not humane. To build a 30-foot wall or to find 11 million people and deport them quickly is not practical. But I also think it needs to be fair. I think that if you came here and you broke this nation's laws to come here, you need to go to the end of the line. You need to pay fees and penalties to get into the system. And then I also think you need to learn English. I do. And if you talk to most immigration activists and advocates, they will tell you the same thing, that they want to learn English too, because it makes you more competitive in the marketplace. I support a guest worker program. I actually introduced a piece of legislation called the Enlist Act, and it's bipartisan. Actually, I co-sponsored it. A Republican introduced it. I co-sponsored it. And what it says that if you enlist in the United States military and you serve 4 years honorably, at the end of that, you get a green card. I can't think of a better way to show your loyalty to a nation than to wear its uniform and be willing to die for it.
Thank you very much.
That's for like DACA kids.
Thank you. Shifting just a little bit, you spoke about the Mississippi River and the importance of locks and dams, and the Corps of Engineers and has had priorities for lock and dam improvements for over 15 years. We passed a water bill, kind of fell short on the appropriation side. How can you push this forward and the $12 million appropriation that we really need? How can you get those dollars appropriate that we really need?
Well, I think that's where my successes on armed services in the House will carry over to the Senate. I think that being on armed services will allow me to do that. Armed services does oversee the Army Corps of Engineers budget. And what's great is that, I don't know if you folks, I'm losing, okay. It's almost like I have to be like some rock star. Look at this, like, to hear it, I have to be like really kissing the mic. So I'll wipe this off after I'm done with it.
That's straight.
Okay, here we go. Well, Senator Durbin is actually the ranking member, so he's the top Democrat on Armed Services Appropriations Committee. And I think with him in that position, hopefully in the majority in the Senate and me on armed services, I think we're going to be able to get a lot of stuff done, and I plan on making sure that Illinois gets our fair share. And the locks and dams and funding for the Corps of Engineers is a major priority. Look, $12 million is a lot of money, but it is not a lot of money in the Department of Defense budget. I wrote a piece of legislation. I talked about the Stryker military vehicle. I also wrote a piece of legislation that had to do with how the Department of Defense buys camouflage fabric to make its uniform. And the estimate from the Government Accounting Office was that my bill would save $93 million just for the Army alone the first year the first year was in effect. It passed in 2014, and they came back at the beginning of 2015 and said, actually, it's already saved the taxpayers $4.3 billion DOD-wide. $12 million is a drop in the bucket. And yet it affects billions of dollars in agriculture, produce, and commerce. And so it is stupid that we're not funding this.
Absolutely. And along the lines of trade agreement that has been you mentioned earlier, China is not a part of TPP. I've heard that TPP is valuable to counter Chinese influence. Why is this not part of the discussion or the debate going on today?
Well, I think the administration, this is one of the things where I stood up to the administration and said I can't support TPP. The issue is that it's a relationship between China and Vietnam, right? If you just look at the TPP signatories, it's Vietnam, it's not China. But the fact of the matter is, another problem with TPP that I have problems with is rules of origin labeling. And it actually says that a product that is assembled in Vietnam in some areas could be as much as 50% made in China, just put together in Vietnam, and it has a made in Vietnam sticker and it comes in here. And that goes not just for things like dishwashers. If you go down and you buy a Haier dishwasher here, you know why we don't have Kenmore dishwashers anymore? is because the Chinese are dumping their stuff here, and tire is Chinese made. It can be, all the parts could be made in China, or over 50% of it, sent to Vietnam, assembled in Vietnam, slapped with a made in Vietnam label. But it's not just the dishwashers, it's also the food. It's also the food that the Chinese could be producing, shipped to Vietnam, product of Vietnam. It comes into this country under TPP, and it's a real problem. I so wanted to be able to vote for TPP because of the agricultural parts of it, and I will work as hard as I can to make up for that in other agricultural agreements and every way that I can. I just can't overlook Chinese actions and currency manipulation and the rules of origin labeling.
Next question. Please address the statement attributed to you regarding bringing in 200,000 Syrian refugees.
Oh, of course. Well, you know, politics ain't tiddlywinks. And so there's a lot of negative ads. Let me just start off with this. As I said before, my family did not serve this nation for 240 years in uniform to jeopardize her security. I didn't serve this nation for 23 years and defended it. I didn't bleed for this nation to jeopardize national security. The issue with the refugees is this: the vast majority of the refugees, and I asked to be briefed by both the Department of the director himself of the Immigration Services, and I've attended top secret briefings by Jay Johnson, the director of Homeland Security. The refugees who are selected to come to the U.S. are very different than the refugees that are fleeing across borders into France and all of these other places. To come to the U.S., the UN High Commission for Refugees actually selects largely families with no men of military age. And there are no men of military age in these families because the men are dead. They're widows and orphans. And the men of military age, according to what the briefings I received, who are part of the refugees who are even selected to begin the process of coming to the U.S., those men that are there are torture victims and people fleeing ISIS because they've been targeted. People who are, have been translators for the U.S. military, for example. When the UN High Commission for Refugees select these people, they enter into a minimum 18-month-long vetting process, sometimes as long as 36 months. They're interviewed by the State Department people in the field, by Homeland Security in the field, by the UN in the field. They go through biometric screening. By the time they get through that process and they get here, they have been so thoroughly vetted that we know exactly who they are. They are not this. So when you see those commercials on the air, they make it seem like they're just fleeing here. They were in Syria last week, they're here next week. That's not who they are. My concern with the refugees and why I think we should allow them to come, I said, I support 200,000 overall, 100,000 from Syria specifically, but 200,000 overall, is that we are jeopardizing American security. If we leave kids to grow up in those refugee camps, and if we turn our back and we create a religious litmus test for who can come to this country, we are feeding ISIS propaganda. We are growing the next generation of kids who will grow up to be people who shoot down American helicopters like the kid who shot me down. And I am not going to, after I spend my entire life defending this nation, to jeopardize my nation's security. And I certainly am not going to let us weaken the Constitution that I swore an oath to defend by turning our backs on the very founding principles and values of this great nation. We're better than that. We should be leading the world. And the people who are selected to come here are thoroughly vetted. 18 to 36 months biometric screening by multiple agencies. And so when you see those commercials, the one that you're seeing right now, I think is funded by a super PAC funded by Ken Griffin, who wrote a $2.5 million check to Bruce Rauner. I mean, this is like I said, politics ain't tiddlywinks. Look it up, do the research. We're a better nation than that, and it is in our nation's best safety and security to make sure that we participate in this process.
Next question. As we approach the writing of a new farm bill, in a challenging economic time, what threats do you see to the current farm bill, and how would you change it, or what different changes would you have in mind to a writing of a new farm bill?
Well, I am strongly supporting a comprehensive farm bill. I think some of the issues that are in there that I voted for the last Farm Bill. I was one of the few Democrats who did vote for it, and I was, went up against my leadership to vote for it because I think there were a lot of problems with it, but overall it was better for agriculture to have a Farm Bill than not. One of the issues from the last one was how much they cut for food programs. The cuts to food stamps, the cut to many of the subsidy programs were very significant, and that's one of the greatest, that's one of the biggest sources of that purchases agriculture. And so I would want to make sure those are there. I'm always keeping an eye on crop insurance, because people who don't understand crop insurance and what it does think that it's a handout. It's not. You actually have to make a conscious effort to buy crop insurance. You have to put yourself out and do a capital outlay in order to buy it. So I think that is something that always gets put on the table. They always want to cut down the numbers or that sort of thing. But then beyond the Farm Bill, as I said, there are other issues that have to do with trade that we have to keep our eyes on as well. But I will be a strong supporter for the Farm Bill, and this is where the relationship with the corn growers, the soybean growers, the Farm Bureau is something that I've grown to really value. I'm not a farmer. I don't come from a farm family. And so to have the resources there that I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I don't quite understand what this means. Can you explain it to me a little bit better? Has been a great resource. And I will make you this promise. If I vote on something, you will know where I stand. And if we don't agree on something, you will also know why I'm voting at. Like I've explained TPP to you. I will always be upfront, and I will always be available.
Along those same lines, there's been a lot of discussion and comments made about the separation of the commodity title and the SNAP program in the Farm Bill debate. Where do you stand on that? Should they stay together, or do you think they should be separated and voted on separately?
I think they should be together. I think it's a single package. But again, this is one of those things. I'm not an expert. I just know that it's worked in the past. It's been a cornerstone of our nation's both our programs to make sure people don't go hungry in this country, but also of agriculture for 80 years. And so I don't see why, if it's successful, we need to separate it unless it's an effort to undermine SNAP. And I don't think that's good for agriculture, but I could be wrong. And if I am, I'm willing to learn from you guys.
Thank you. Shifting just a little bit, with the storm of tax reform and the rhetoric they hear in the presidential campaign with regard to tax reform, could you support the elimination of the death tax? I'm open to looking at comprehensive tax reform. I don't know if the inheritance tax is one, as it stands, is something that I can support. I would be open to looking at things. For example, I know that it's a big effect on farm families who inherit. People think, because you have equipment that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and you have acreage that has value, that farm families are wealthy, when really you're only clearing, in some cases in a bad year, 10, 15, 20,000 a year after all your debts are paid. So I would be willing to look, but it's got to be part of a comprehensive reform, and I don't support it for the top 1% of earners. I just don't think that people who live in Manhattan who are making, billions of dollars should get a break before hardworking Americans should. And I'll give you an example of a piece of comprehensive tax reform that I do support. I'm actually introducing a piece of legislation right now that closes a tax loopholes. Companies right now can write off on their taxes bonus payments to their top executives. These are people who make on average $1.6 million a year. They can write off their bonus payments at the end of the year to these guys on their taxes. If you close that tax loophole and say you can give them the bonuses, you just got to pay taxes on it, you actually get enough money back to give every person on Social Security and Social Security disability $580 this year, which would be equivalent to the pay raise people on Social Security didn't get. Those are the kinds of things. If you're going to give tax cuts to large corporations and you want to lower the top tax rate so that they bring money back in from overseas, then we need to cut the tax rates for businesses here as well, because our small and medium business owners are paying 20, 25, 30% tax rates. We need to, if we're going to give it to, GE, we got to give it, to Gerard, right? You got to give it to your local folks as well. So comprehensive tax reform, I'm willing to look at the inheritance tax, but it can't just be something that overwhelmingly benefits. But I'm willing to look and see, do we do a carve out
for farmers and for a very specific reason, that makes sense.
Any other questions coming from the crowd? Well, let's show our appreciation to Congresswoman
Thank you,
Duckworth.
everyone.
Thank you very much.